think it works. I think it's working. Okay? Here's where we are at tonight. Chapter 7, Paul has some solutions to the sexual immorality, the things that they were challenged with there in that area. He is going to speak to two different groups in this chapter. He is going to speak to the married people, and then he will speak to the singles about how to avoid sexual immorality, what those relationships should look like. You will want to know this. Well, I'll explain when we get into it in just a moment in verse 1. I'll explain a little bit more on that. But you need to keep a few things in mind as we go through this chapter. Okay? Context. Okay? What is the context? Remember that the Corinthians, we just came off of chapter 6, obviously, and Paul had been talking to them about sexual immorality. We know that they struggled with that. But God still loved them. God wanted to work in them. God wanted to work in this area, change their lives. But remember that this is a church that is right in the middle of, they're in Corinth. They're right in the middle of all the mess, and we've related it to our own Southern California experience every week that, we know what it's about. We see all of the different things that go on around us, the freedom specifically in the area of sex that our world has, and Southern California certainly has that going on also. So just remember that they lived in Corinth. Remember the priests and priestesses, the prostitutes, male and female prostitutes, and all that. Okay, there's something else that you want to remember. This passage is following, again, a passage on sexual immorality from chapter 6. So he's talking to them about that. And then what happens, we'll see it here in just a moment in verse 1, if I can ever get started. We'll see that now, beginning in verse 7, he's beginning to answer specific questions. But he was talking about sexual immorality, and then he transitions right into the questions that they had. And this is one of the questions that they had was about this topic, sexual immorality. Here's something else that you want to keep in mind. The church asked Paul these questions. We'll see that in verse 1 again. He says, you wrote to me. You asked me these things. So Paul is answering specific questions. And the last thing that you want to keep in mind, as far as context is concerned, and as we get into these answers, you'll want to keep in mind that Paul is not just a Bible teacher. He's not just a church leader. He is a missionary. He's missionary-minded. Okay? Let me give you a little example. If you were to say, you know what, I'm going to be starting college in a couple of years, or at least I'll be graduating, and I'm not really sure what I should do after college or after high school. Now, if you ask your parents what you should do, they're going to have an idea. Well, here's what you should do. And they might, for some of you, they might have it all spelled out like this. You should do A, B, and C in that order. And get this done and do that and do these things and go to the school, and you should have this all done. But if you were to talk to, say, my friend Jeannie is a missionary down in Mexico. Some of us have met her. A few of us have met her. If you were to ask her, hey, what should I do after high school? She probably would have a much different answer than your parents did. She probably would be more along the lines of, well, have you ever thought about full-time missionary work? You ever thought about, maybe you should pray about coming down for a summer or spending a year with us? And maybe, she would have a much different viewpoint on it. Paul is a missionary. He's missionary-minded. So when he goes into some of these answers, I'll tell you right off the bat, Paul prefers singleness. And we'll see that in these verses. And it's almost, you might feel like, well, wait a minute. God said, he looked at Adam and said, it's not good for man to be alone. So, everybody around, all the Christians around me, it's like they all, all the Christians that I know, they all graduate from high school, they go to vertical, and then they get married. So that's like the thing to do. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. What does God have to say about it? And, so just keep those things in mind. Now, let's pick it up. We're going to look at the first group, which is the married people. This is going to take us down to verse 24 Maybe we'll get that far tonight. You're going to see that we're going to deal with two different groups of married people. You have the Christian couples. Both people are Christian. And then a little bit later into the chapter, we'll look at married couples where one of the individuals, one of the spouses is Christian, the other one is not. And what are we supposed to do about that? Let's pick it up in verse 1 where Paul begins this way. He says, now. That word now indicates that, okay, we're moving on to a different section. Okay, but remember, he's just been talking about sexual immorality, and he's still got that on his mind as he goes into their questions. Now, concerning the things of which you wrote to me. So the Corinthians had written a letter to Paul, and evidently they wrote a letter and they asked him some questions. He says, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me, I love this. I've used this for years, being in youth ministry, guys the guys will come up and like, hey, I really want to date this chick. And, what do you think about that? Well, number one, if you're calling her a chick, you shouldn't be dating her, okay? You don't deserve her, okay? The second thing is 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. Oh, what does that say? It says it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Stay away from her. Now, what does he mean there, verse 1? It is good for a man not to touch a woman. He is referring to a sexual relationship. He is saying it's good for a man not to be in a sexual relationship with a woman. Nevertheless, verse 2. Nevertheless. Now, what he does here is he begins to talk to the Christian couples. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality. So what he's just said real quickly, just to give you an idea of where we're going. Verse 1, he said it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Essentially what Paul is saying is it's good for for Christians to stay single. And then he says in verse 2 immediately, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality. In other words, those two single Christians, sexual immorality was rampant in Corinth. He says, I realize it's a problem. And it'd be really, really, really hard to stay single and pure in Corinth. We know it would be really, really hard to stay single and pure in Southern California. Right? Because of the attitude towards sex and about sex. Hey, everybody should do it and it's free and, you just, be with as many people as you can. You guys know the mindset. So he says, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, because of the temptation, let each man have his own wife. So Paul's first solution to sexual immorality is for a Christian man and a Christian woman to be married to one another. And for them to be in a sexual relationship, just them two. Okay, he'll go on to develop this. Let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Not somebody else's, nobody else should be in the mix. It's let each Christian man and each Christian woman that are married, let them have one another. Now the word, or the phrase sexual immorality there, just so we're all clear, we've heard this word before. I've shared it with you before. It is the word porneia. Porneia. Sounds a lot like porn or pornography, obviously. Same idea. Just so we're clear, porneia, what does it mean? It refers to adultery, fornication, homosexuality, lesbianism, bestiality, that's with animals, sexual intercourse with close relatives, sexual intercourse with a divorced man or woman. In other words, he uses that word porneia to just make sure that, hey, we're all clear here. Everything's covered. Basically, what he's getting at from right out of the gate, he's saying, listen, sex should be between one man and one woman, and that's it. The husband and wife, that's it. Now, what he tells us here, the first thing in verse 3 is this. Christian couples, let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. So in a Christian marriage, there should be affection given back and forth from the husband to the wife, from the wife to the husband. They should be affectionate toward one another. Now, what does that mean? Some of you are blessed with affectionate parents. Maybe you have a mom or a dad. My mom, growing up, my mom was so affectionate. It used to drive me crazy. And I would tease her, I'd mess with her. Even as I got older and started to have, a family of my own, she was still always wanting to give me a kiss on the cheek and give me a hug and wanted to kiss and hug everybody. And I used to tell her, "Oh, come on, lady, leave me alone." Jokingly, because I loved my mom, obviously, and her hugs and her kisses and her affection. But that was my mom. She was affectionate. Now I'll let you. I'm gonna let you in a little bit on some of my family history. Okay, don't get all excited. I'm not giving you much. But my mom was always very affectionate. My dad was not. So I think, from what I can remember, I remember my dad twice. I remember my dad hugging me. That was it. He was not affectionate. Now I know, there's no doubt in my mind, I know that he loved me, but he was not affectionate. My mom made up for it, man. 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times over. She was always hugging, kissing. Affection is a good thing. And some people get very awkward about it. Sometimes it's like, "Oh man, my mom wants to hug me. She's dropping me off at school. She wants to give me a kiss on the cheek. Or my dad's dropping me off, and he's like, 'Hey, what's up? You can't give your old man a kiss on the cheek anymore. What's the problem?' And you just feel like, it's just I'm not gonna look cool. Listen, relax. You don't look cool anyways. Give him a kiss on the cheek. Let her kiss your forehead or whatever, mom wants to do or whatever. I'm telling you this. We're coming up on, I'm coming up on 18 years now. 18 years ago, my mom went to be with the Lord. She's gone. She's not been around for 18 years. And I do not want my mom, I don't want my mom back. She's with the Lord. Why in the world would I want her back? But I do miss her. And I do miss her craziness and all of that, but I also miss her affection. And time is short and it goes fast, and one of these days you're going to wish that you had it. And your mom and your dad, your parents, your family, they're going to be gone too long. I mean, too soon. It's going to be too soon. It's going to be too soon. And you're going to wish that you had it. Enjoy it while you've got it. But Christian couples are supposed to be affectionate toward one another, Paul says. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her. And likewise also the wife to her husband. But there's another thing here, verses 4 through 9. Some people hate this, but this is part of it. Authority. Authority? Look at this, verse 4. The wife, the wife does not have authority over her own body. Hold up. My body, my choice. No man's going to answer and tell me what I can do with my body. And ain't nobody going to, everybody understands what I'm talking about. My body, my choice. And Paul says not so in the Christian marriage. In the Christian marriage, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the ladies are like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound fair. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Now, what does Paul mean by that? Does that mean that the guy can't go pump some iron or get all buffed out without his wife's permission? I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that he can't eat what he wants? I can't have oatmeal in the morning. My wife doesn't let me. I got to eat sausages. What does that mean? What it means is, remember context. We're talking about this area of sexual immorality and the challenges that go along with it. What he's saying is, listen, wife, listen, husband, you don't have the right to just go give yourself to anybody that you just desire to. Your body is your husband's. Your body is your wife's. And it's for him or her alone. That's it. That's what Paul is saying there. Verse 5, he says, do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. What? Do not deprive one another. What are you talking about? Remember, we're talking about sex. And what Paul is saying to the Christian couple, the husband and the wife, he's saying, do not withhold sexually from one another, except with consent for a short time. In other words, you both agree, husband and wife, you both agree, okay, we're not going to have a sexual relationship for a short time, whatever the time is. Now you say, well, why would they even do that? Why would they stop? Well, here's why. He gives us a reason why in verse 5, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer. In other words, there may be a time in your lives where, hey, we really have this huge thing going on. Grandma's sick. She's got COVID, or uncle, he's got cancer, or man, we're really praying for our daughter or our son, to have wisdom and make the right choices, or I've got a prodigal son or a prodigal daughter. And the husband and wife may find that they come to this time where, we really need to be in prayer, we really need to be seeking the Lord, and they would abstain from having sex with one another so that they can totally focus completely 100% on God. And Paul says, if that happens, just for a short time. Now, why for a short time? That you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and then come together again sexually, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So that the wife or the husband, hey man, I haven't been with my spouse in a long time, and we've been fasting and praying, but now I'm being tempted by this other person. Paul says, listen, don't let that happen. Just for a short time, but you need to make sure that you're coming back together. Verse 6, but I say this as a concession, not as a commandment. In other words, he doesn't have some kind of command in the Word of God that tells you, you need to do this or you need to do that. He's sharing his wisdom. Look what he says, what he throws in here, verse 7. For I wish that all men were even as I myself. Now, what he means by that is, Paul, as far as we know, was a single man. Some people have speculated as to whether he had been married. Well, if he was a Pharisee, he had to have a wife, and they come up with these different things. But as far as we know, what we have, the account that we have of Paul and his life, as far as we know, he was single. He was a missionary. He's on the go, serving God. And so in verse 6, he throws in there, but I say this as a concession, not as a commandment, for I wish that all men, and when he says all men, he means mankind. I wish that all people were even as myself. Well, what? What do you mean, Paul? Single, serving God, 24/7, 366 days a year, 8 days a week, going for it, full on, 110%, all the time. For I wish that all men were even as myself, but he understands each one has his own gift from God. So one in this manner and another in that. Paul had been gifted, obviously, at this time with that kind of a mindset, with that kind of a lifestyle, that single lifestyle. Not everybody's gifted that way, right? Some of you ladies are like, no, I am not gifted that way. I want to get married one of these days. I want to have a relationship. I do not have the gift of singleness. Not everybody does. Not everybody does. But Paul had been called to that. Everybody's got their own gift. And so he says in verse 7, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. Verse 8, but I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. But, so he threw in his little 2 cents on singleness. And then he says in verse 9, but if they cannot exercise self-control, if they cannot abstain, if they're single and they cannot abstain from having a sexual relationship, then let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn. And when he says burn, he means burn with passion. It's better for someone to get married if all they're doing is burning with passion. In other words, all they're doing is sinning by lusting. He says then it's better that they just get married. Don't stay single. Now, he goes on. He says, the first one was affection. Christian couples must show affection. They must give authority to one another, to their spouse. And let me just throw something else in there real quickly. In the event that you ever, in the years to come, you ever find me and say, hey, I'm going to get married. Would you please do our counseling? And would you please officiate our wedding? I would be glad to do that. But I'll give you a heads up. Whenever I do premarital counseling, I've been doing this for years. doing premarital counseling, married a lot of different couples. My one big thing that every single week, there's like a workbook, you go through the manual, you do all these sessions. My one big thing is always service, service, service. Whenever you are in a relationship, and especially a marriage relationship, what you are doing is, when you go down to you're so in love and you go down to the Hall of Records and you get your marriage license and you just we sign, you're taking pictures of everything. Oh, there's my signature, click. Oh, there's his signature, click. Oh, the judge signed it, click. Oh, the lady behind the desk signed it, click. There's a staple, click. You're just taking pictures of everything. Taking pictures of everything. What you need to remember is this. What I'm going to remind you of is this. That when you sign your name, I don't know what all of that says on that form, but I'm telling you this. What it means is I'm signing, and what I'm doing is I am promising to serve this other person for the rest of my life. That's what marriage is. Marriage is a lot of things. What it's not is it's not always fairy tale, fantasy. It's not always la la land. It's not. But what it always is service. In those times when it's not romantic, in those times when it's not notebook, in those times when it's not fantasy and fairy tale, in those times when it's not Prince Charming, in those times it's self-sacrifice, it's self-service, it's, I committed to love this person and to care for this person all the rest of our days, for as long as we live. And so that's what I got to do. Even though I don't like him right now, I hate him, I still got to serve him. Even though she's been nagging me and I really don't want to do it, I got to serve her because I said I would. Pastor Chris wouldn't leave me alone every single week. He's bugging me about it. Service. And we get a taste of that in the authority. You give yourself away to that other individual. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. But I digress. Verse 10 and 11. Here's the third thing. You need to make a lifelong commitment. Christian couples need to make a lifelong commitment. Now to the married I command, yet not I but the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband. But even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife. So what he says there, the third thing is with these married couples, is that they, not only the affection, not only the authority, but they need to make a lifelong commitment. To the married I command, Paul says, yet not I but the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband. It's pretty funny. I looked up that word depart. It's like, okay, what exactly? Because then in verse 11, he uses the word divorce for the husband. It's like, well, wait a minute. She's not to depart, but he's not to divorce. And they essentially mean the same thing. When they're talking about, it covers all of it. It covers divorce, but it also covers just even separation. Sometimes couples will not divorce, but they'll separate because they have issues going on. But the word depart, I looked it up and it was like, hey, that says chorizo. It's like, what is that? And then I listened to the pronunciation and it was chorizo. It was like, oh, he's pronouncing it wrong. It's chorizo. Right. But it means any kind of separation. A wife is not to separate or divorce or depart from her husband. She's not to abandon him. But even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife. Now, these verses 10 and 11, are transitioning into the next section, which is verses 12 and beyond, down to verse 24. These are transitional verses. He's talking about the Christian couples, but he's about to start talking about those couples, or talking to those couples where one is a Christian and one is not. Married couples, one is a Christian, one is not. Now, what was probably, most likely, what was happening was this, and we'll see it more as we get into the following verses, but we get a little hint of it in verses 10 and 11. Probably what was happening in Corinth with some of these couples was that some of them, like you have a couple, one person gets saved. And then they were going home to this unsaved heathen. And like, hey, I'm in this new church. You want to go? What's up? No, I'm not going to that church. I don't have anything to do with it. I don't want to have anything to do with that. And then some of these couples, it seems to us, it would appear to us from the following verses that some of them were like, well, I'm a Christian now, and if you're not a Christian, I'm dumping you. Dump the chump. Because I can't be unequally yoked to some Christian. And Paul's going to go on to tell them, no, don't divorce. But he begins that topic right now. But with the Christian couples, it needs to be a lifelong commitment. Incredible story. I am currently right now counseling, premarital counseling with a couple. I won't tell their names and all that kind of stuff, although I don't think that they would care. It's an incredible story. They're going to be getting married in the next month or two. They divorced earlier this year. They were married. They divorced. The divorce was finalized earlier this year. And then after being apart, they were like, what are we doing? We need to get back together as fast as we can. And they showed up here like, hey, we need some counseling. What's up? What's going on? We're divorced. Okay. Well, we want to get remarried. What do you want from me? Like, I don't, and they're looking at me like, well, we just feel like if we're going to do this the second time, we better make sure the Lord's in the middle of it. Like, well, I don't, and they're looking at me like, you tell us what to do. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, you've already been married, just go get married again. I don't know. And we've been going through premarital counseling, going through the book. They were like, hey, take us through the book. Just like if we were, a first-time couple, take us back to the book. Let's just do it. Let's learn. Let's grow. And it's like, it is probably, if not the funnest, it's absolutely one of the funnest premarital counseling sessions that I've ever done. It's pretty incredible to see God restoring a couple. And they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones that I've heard of. This is the first time that I've experienced it myself personally, but I know some others. I know of a pastor in Hawaii who's good friends with our senior pastor. Him and his wife divorced, and then they ended up getting back together and remarrying. Incredible stories. Incredible stories. Those are the ones you don't hear about, right? We only hear about the messy ones. They sued and they hated each other, and all the mess. Paul says, look, don't separate, don't depart, don't abandon one another. But even in verse 11, even if she does depart, and I have no problem saying that this would apply to the guys also, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife. Christians ought not ever divorce. What does God's word say about God in divorce? It says that God hates divorce. God hates divorce. So the idea is, what Paul is telling these Christian couples is, you need to stay together. You need to work it out. You need to weather the storm. There should be affection happening. You must give authority of yourself over to the other person, but there must also be a lifelong commitment. The marriage relationship is a picture of Jesus and his church. And when the marriage relationship is dissolved, when there's divorce happening, when it's a broken relationship, then it's a bad reflection of Jesus and his church. So it was of the utmost importance for the Corinthians to stay married. I want you to think about this. The type of, remember, Remember with me back to the temple on the hill of the Acropolis, I think it was called. And all these priestesses, these prostitutes coming down into the city every day, every night, and all of this sexual immorality. It was just normal. It's regular. It's what people do. You just do that. And Paul's talked to the church and said, listen, nobody ought to be getting together with any prostitutes, male or female, and all of these things ought not be happening. And for them to say, you know what, we're committed. We're going to stay together. We're going to stick it out. We're going to make it work. Must have been so abnormal for so many of the Corinthians. And I'm not even talking the Corinthians in the church. I'm just talking about the Corinthians in the city. I mean, they must have just had people, friends and family members just busting their chops. Like, look at the guy you're married to. The guy's a jerk and this and that. And to have some Christian wife saying, no, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to stay as long as I can. And I'm going to love this guy. Like Christ loved the church. I'm going to love this guy. Or the other way with the guy is like, hey, why are you with that lady, man? She doesn't even make you fresh tortillas, man. Why don't you go find yourself somebody else in the city? Go find one of those women and, have her, she'll, you get those women out there, they'll marry you and she'll make you fresh tortillas every night and, man, treat you well. And why don't you just go do that? No. I understand who this woman is that I'm married to, and yeah, maybe she doesn't do this or she doesn't do that, but listen, I'm going to love her like Christ loved the church. I'm going to stick around. I've made a lifelong commitment. My commitment is not to society or anybody else. My commitment is to the Lord first and then to this individual. So no, I'm sticking around and I'm going to make this work. I'm going to do my best to make it work. And there are times and situations when one of the spouses is just not willing to work. What do? Paul will address that in the next section, which there's no way we can get into tonight. I don't want to rush through it at all, so we'll start at verse 12 next time. But this is one of Paul's solutions to sexual immorality as it pertains to the marriage relationship where the husband and the wife maybe are starting to be involved in sexual immorality and they didn't know any better, and so Paul is laying it out for them. This is what a Christian married couple is supposed to look like. Affection should be rendered. You'd be giving affection. Authority, giving yourself, the authority over yourself to this other individual, and then giving a lifelong commitment. I mean, look, it's just three things. But I want you to think about this. All of this requires the individual in the relationship to give of him or herself. To give. That's what it's for. That's what we do, is we impart, we invest, we give. That's what we do. We're Christians. That's what we do. Did Jesus give his life? Yes. So we give ours. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to do what? To serve. He came to give. So what do? We give. And the pattern ought not be missing from the married couples, the Christian couples relationship. Give affection, give authority, give this lifelong commitment. Father, thank you so much for your word.